Tony Nunes. I live at 123 Elm Street in Stonington, and I work in Westerly. I'm just going to speak pretty briefly, not take up 10 minutes, on the new business resolution in support of House Bill H6324, entitled An Act Relating to Criminal Offenses, Obscene and Objectionable Publication and Shows. I am here in support of my colleagues at Westerly Library, fellow artists who live in the area, and I myself work for a nonprofit art center here in Westerly. I'm also a father of 3. While I understand the intention behind this bill is to address certain concerns regarding offensive material and exposure to that material by minors, I firmly believe that the proposed legislation represents a grave threat to the principles of artistic freedom, freedom of expression, and ultimately our society's ability to foster diverse and inclusive communities. I also think that some of the language within this resolution is troublingly vague, to the point that it runs the risk of making blanket statements, allowing for censorship of those who are not minors as well. It's essential to recognize the lessons learned from countless instances of censorship throughout history, where the suppression of ideas and artistic expression have often led to the perpetuation of bigotry. Art has always played a pivotal role in challenging societal norms and encouraging dialogue. Many renowned artists, writers, and thinkers of the past have had their works deemed objectionable or obscene by the prevailing authorities of their time. However, it is often these works that have contributed to profound shifts in perspectives and spurred social change. By allowing for diverse and sometimes controversial expressions, we foster an environment that promotes critical thinking, empathy, and the exploration of new ideas. Many of the definitions in this resolution are concerningly subjective. Censorship based on subjective standards of obscenity or objectionability carries significant risk of being influenced by personal biases or prejudices. When these standards are used to determine what is acceptable in art, we run the danger of erasing the experiences, narratives, and identities of marginalized communities. Art has long served as a platform for these communities to express themselves, to share their stories, and to challenge the oppressive structures that seek to silence them. A society that embraces diverse artistic expressions benefits from a rich cultural tapestry that fosters dialogue and empathy. By restricting the range of artistic materials available to our community, we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to engage with different perspectives and challenge our own preconceptions. It is through this interaction with diverse art that we grow as individuals and as a society. Instead of resorting to censorship, I urge the council to consider alternative approaches to address concerns about offensive material. Dialogue and education fostering critical thinking skills can play a pivotal role in helping individuals navigate and analyze challenging content. By investing in community programs and initiatives that encourage media literacy and promote responsible consumption, we can empower our citizens to make informed choices without infringing upon their freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nunes. Next, please.
Good evening, Marianne Morando, 14 Massachusetts Ave, Westerly. President Marone, Vice President Lowther, and council members. I am writing this in opposition of support of Bill H6324. I have been the librarian at Westerly High School since 2001 and recently had a formal challenge from a citizen in our community who has been very vocal about his opposition to the inclusion of the memoir Genderqueer by Maia Kobabe, as well as a few other books that have been questioned but not yet formally challenged. Every book in question concerns LGBTQ+ and BIPOC people. The population of students at my school includes students from these groups, and yet certain people argue that the books in question have no place in our library. What message does that send to our students? Do their stories have no place in our school? Do they have no place in our school? My role as librarian is to continue to develop a diverse collection to support and enrich the curriculum. as well as students' personal interests and learning. There are various criteria I consider when deciding to include a book in the library collection. I read reviews written in professional journals such as School Library Journal, Book List, and Hornbook, and include books that have won young adult awards. Each book or author of a book at my school that has been either challenged or questioned has won an award and or been given stellar reviews for their appeal to young adults, as well as their literary and artistic merits. In fact, according to the American Library Code of Ethics, we do have a code of ethics. I would be remiss in my professional responsibilities if I excluded these books from my collection because of my personal beliefs or fear of retribution. Books are a safe place for students to explore questions and interests, and I stand firmly on by my choices and will continue to defend them and thereby defend my students' right to learn and freedom of information. I've been a high school librarian for over 22 years, and I'm close to retirement, and frankly, a loud voice in my community who challenges books does not intimidate me. However, if I were a young librarian just starting my career, I might question every purchase and weigh it against any possible negative opinion, afraid for my job security. This is soft censorship, and unfortunately, it is happening. Nervous about persecution and or prosecution, some librarians avoiding our controversy altogether and just excluding certain voices in their collections. And that is a loss for libraries, library users, and society. The book challenged at my school was reviewed by a committee, and I was not obviously on that committee. The challenge was denied, and the book remains on the shelf. Unsatisfied, the complainant sent a letter to the Attorney General's office in hopes that our Attorney General would, and I quote the complainant, do the right thing. He wanted me and several others prosecuted by the Attorney General's office based on nothing but personal opinion. Librarians are highly educated and trained experts in selecting information suitable for our schools and communities and must be protected so they can continue to promote reading and information for all. If we do not protect our librarians, we do not protect our libraries, and that is the beginning of the end of our freedom to read and our freedom of information. Libraries are not the threat. Book banning is the threat.
Thank
Good evening. My name is Brigette Hopkins. I'm the Executive Director of Westerly Library in Wilcox Park, as well as a Westerly resident living at 39 Highland Avenue. I'm here tonight to speak in opposition to proposed House Bill H6324, which seeks to amend an existing Rhode Island general law. Intellectual freedom is a core value of the library profession, my profession, and a basic right in our democratic society. Librarians strive to serve the varying interests of every person in their community. We believe in an individual's right to read, oppose attempts to ban books from libraries, and oppose any legislation that infringes upon Westerly and Rhode Island citizens' First Amendment rights. There are materials in libraries, including public and school libraries, that may not be the right fit for one person, but the perfect fit for another. This is the beauty of the library. Everyone has a right to find materials on our shelves in which they can experience other places, times, and people, but also to find themselves. In 1990, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop coined the phrase windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors to explain how children see themselves in books and how they can learn about the lives of others through literature. When books don't serve as mirrors to children, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in society. Books can also serve as windows that give readers a glimpse into the lives and experiences of others. And librarians have the critical task of making sure our young community members have access to books that serve as both windows and mirrors. It is the responsibility of public libraries to guarantee and facilitate access to all expressions of knowledge and intellectual activity, including those which some individuals in our community may consider to be unconventional, unpopular, or unacceptable. Please note that public libraries do not take on the role of a parent, and it is a parent's responsibility to decide what materials they will allow their own children to read. No one individual or group should make sweeping decisions that take that process of careful consideration away from the experts, the librarians, and that choice away from readers. As this legislation here in Rhode Island and around the country attempts to challenge and ban books and criminalize libraries and library workers, it is critical to know that libraries do not have obscene materials on their shelves. Obscenity is determined by the court of law, federal law, U.S. Code Title 18, Section 1, Chapter 71, prohibits the possession with intent to sell or distribute obscenity, to send, ship, or receive obscenity, to import obscenity, and to transport obscenity across state borders for purposes of distribution. Therefore, libraries cannot purchase obscenity on the open market and thus cannot have it on their shelves. And publishers cannot sell obscene materials to anyone, including libraries. We guarantee that there are 0 obscene books on the shelves of any library in Rhode Island. And this bill implies that we do, which I find offensive. Thank you.
Bill Lancelota, 6 George Street in Westerly. I'm the Assistant Director of Westerly Library in Wilcox Park. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the resolution in support of House Bill H6324, which I strongly oppose. This bill seeks to criminalize librarians and educators for doing their jobs. While supporters of this bill may say they are not banning books, it is clearly designed to intimidate these workers and make them fearful when selecting materials, or even get them to remove materials from their collections. What is that if not book banning in disguise? Also, the proposed changes add nothing to the existing law, except to target formats that some folks dislike and to threaten institutions like libraries that seek to help and enrich all members of our community. This manufactured outrage has been generated for an issue that simply does not exist. No librarians are stocking their shelves with pornography. It doesn't happen. Yes, you may not like a book because it addresses topics which make you uncomfortable, but that does not make a work obscene. In Miller versus California, the U.S. Supreme Court established the standard for an obscenity conviction under the Constitution. A work will be found to be obscene if, quote, taken as a whole, it lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Often the books that are labeled by some as obscene are award-winning literature or classics. They can discuss social issues, gender issues, mental health, history, and diversity. And they are of great value to the overlooked and marginalized audiences for whom they were written. So clearly these are not obscene in any but the most extreme and intolerant points of view, and certainly not legally. The answer to what you do when you find a book on a library shelf that you disagree with is not to arrest a librarian. The answer is to put the book back on the shelf. That book is there for someone else. Thank you. I hope you reconsider this.
Good evening. My name is Maria Bernier, 34 Pleasant Street here in Westerly. I'm on the board of the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park, on the board of the Friends of the Library and Park, and a professional librarian for the past 29 years. As you may have guessed, I'm here to speak against the resolution related to House Bill H6324. The author of that resolution and the authors of the bill are apparently not aware that public libraries and school libraries already do not provide access to obscene publications. Luckily, our council knows better, having just been informed differently this evening. Librarians are already choosing age-appropriate materials to place on their shelves based on professional procedures and critical book reviews, as Marianne has told us. Libraries are not promoting indecency in their collections. Library staff also do not presume to do a parent's job. It is the parent's responsibility to monitor what their children are reading and to talk with them about the books they choose. Books, including graphic novels, which are part of this bill, help children and teens learn about themselves while also providing those windows into other worlds, other lives, other perspectives, and other ways of thinking. As we've heard, if you don't like a book, then don't read it. And if you don't think your kids should be reading a specific book, then talk to them about it. But you don't get to make that decision for other parents and other families because they get to decide what they read. Bill H6324 is deeply flawed in many ways. It contains impossibly subjective and unenforceable language. It is also ignorant of the way public and school libraries provide access to material. And by adding libraries to the existing obscenity law, this bill would criminalize the normal, everyday library activity of lending books and graphic novels. The bill is written by someone who has no understanding of different types of libraries, as it applies false requirements of decency to the state legislative library, in addition to school and public libraries. Hopefully, you know the state library contains law books and state agency reports, not books for children and teens. The authors of the bill don't even know enough about libraries and books to know what they're actually legislating. It's obvious to me that Sam Mazzanaro and his co-sponsors do not frequent their public or school libraries, which I find very unfortunate, nor do they frequent the state library located in the State House where they work. The bill's sponsors simply do not know what they're talking about. They're only creating faulty legislation based on false narratives and everything that's going on in the world today, as stated by Mr. Mazzanaro. But let's be clear that Bill H6324 is actually a misguided attempt to get legal permission to ban or remove materials that address homosexuality and queerness. And as a reminder, homosexuality, bisexuality, and pansexuality are legal in the United States, as is being transgender. And whoever proposed this resolution is asking you to support censorship and bigotry. I ask you instead, my counselors, not to tear down rights and not to criminalize libraries and librarians. If you vote to approve this resolution, you will be on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of legality. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jessica Wick. My address is 5 Grove Avenue, Westerly. I'm here like the people who spoke before me to speak against adopting any support of Bill H6324, which hopefully I remembered. I'm speaking off the cuff, so hold on to your ties and your earrings. I'm a citizen of Westerly. I am an artist. I am an author. I've been working in book selling for over 15 years now. Half of those years have been spent as a children's specialty bookseller. This proposed bill is appalling. It adds nothing to the obscenity laws already on the books, and it seeks to cut parents' rights over what their children read off at the knees. It seeks to criminalize people who are just trying to provide education and assistance to curious minds. And quite frankly, I will be ashamed to call myself a Westerly citizen if the council does vote to support this bill. I believe in education. I believe in curiosity, and I believe we're all better than this. And that's all I have to say. That's all that I want on the record. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Laura McLaughlin. I live at 17 Beach Street in Westerly. I am a librarian, although not in Westerly. I work in Barrington. It's a toss-up as to whether I am more sad, disappointed, or angry that the town council is even considering approving a resolution for in favor of House Bill 6324. That is not the type of community I want to be a part of. That is not a type of community I want to be associated with as a librarian. I cannot add to the excellent and eloquent points already made by Mr. Nunes, Ms. Morando, Ms. Hopkins, Mr. Lancelota, Ms. Bernier have all said better than I would what I would like to say. But I do want to say that democracies do not consider jailing librarians. And that's all I have.
Please, Ellen.
Ellen Madison, 149 South Woody Hill Road, Westerly. You know, I'm looking at you all. I'm closing in on 80. I'm older than all of you. And I have survived book banning and book challenges for many years, and I'm sick that this is coming up again in such a really nasty way. So I want to talk about slippery slopes and ask you, what happens if you support this bill 6324? This afternoon, I looked up on the PEN America website. That stands for poets, playwrights, editors, essayists, and novelists who compile lists of challenged books. And between April and December of 2022, which is the most recent listing, there were 874 books which have been challenged. Imagine 874. So I looked to see what they were, and I looked to see what the impact would be on our libraries, but particularly on our schools, because I am a retired English teacher, as many of you know. So what would be impacted if this bill is allowed to pass? Health curriculum. Think about it. The health curriculum. Art. We've already seen Michelangelo's David cause somebody to be fired. History. Critical race theory. Did slavery not exist? English, my field, American literature. I personally went through the list of books of classics which have been banned. I taught 20 of those books, and you have read at least 10 when you were high school students, and probably 20. Because if you didn't hit them in high school, you hit them in college. And you would be shocked at the titles that are on that list. Foreign languages, social studies. How would you like to be a history teacher or a social studies teacher today, trying to teach kids critical thinking skills and be silenced because you're afraid that if you introduce something, somebody's going to come after your job? Science, biology, anatomy, physiology, pictures of nude people, but I want my doctor to have had access to those books. I don't want those banned. I want him to know where my foot is and where my heart is and where there's a difference. Psychology, Holy Moses, almost everybody has a therapist at this point. I do want that therapist to have been exposed to a wide variety of theories, of facts, even business. Look at Disney. And while we're on this slippery slope, teachers and librarians are required to have graduate degrees. And what do they learn? They learn how to choose books based on existing criteria. Cost me a lot of money to get my degree. Maybe if you don't want me to choose books and use my expertise of choosing books for the classroom, maybe I didn't have to get that degree. Slippery slopes. Once you start on this path, the doors open to such dangers to a free society that we cannot risk that. And in a moment of levity, to finish, there was one book I deemed unsuitable for the 16 and 17-year-olds that I taught. But a lot of you have read it to your kids. It was Charlotte's Web. Banned.
Good
Next.
evening. My name is Danielle Bellevo. I live at 19 Grove Avenue here in Westerly. I am the inventory lead at Savoy Bookshop and Cafe. And I also have my master's in library and information science. I was fortunate enough to get it for free through the VA, the GI Bill, so very grateful for that. I was in the Navy for 8 years prior to getting my degree. I'm here today in response to your resolution in support of the amendments to House Bill H6324. In it, you write that we need common sense legislation to prevent the harmful circulation of obscene materials to people under the age of 18, expanding its reach to include schools and libraries and to include comics and other animated material. My goal tonight is not to question the intentions behind this resolution. I believe they are good. Instead, I'd like to ask some questions about the bill itself, because I'm skeptical of how common sense it might actually be. First, I want to point out that the original bill does not define its own terms. The bill says that the average person applying contemporary community standards would be the judge of what constitutes obscenity in a particular material. Later, it defines community standards as Rhode Island as a whole. It later defines standards of decency as community standards of decency. And it might be kind of hard to see how, when I'm speaking this aloud, how this is all a circular logic, but it's all references each other without actually defining anything. It doesn't make sense. So I ask, who is the average person? Whose standards of decency? Which communities' standards of decency? If the community is those who provide entertaining and educational materials to minors, such as educators, librarians, guardians, and booksellers, there are systems already in place to keep inappropriate materials away from children, starting with the editorial process in publishing and ending with the curation process at a school or library or bookstore. Even in the town of Westerly, community standards are not a monolith. Every day at the bookstore, we get the most fascinating variety of feedback. Our books are too woke. Our books are not woke enough. We have too much of one genre. We don't have enough of another genre. And my personal favorite feedback, we don't have enough books about regular old white guys. If you were to get a sampling of our customers into a room and ask them to choose one book with the most or the least literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, you would not arrive at a consensus. If you don't believe me, you can ask literally any book club. This is all to say that our Westerly community has a variety of standards for both morality and merit. Whose values will we use as the yardstick for determining what is obscene or sexually perverse? It is literary professionals and educators who have the experience and education required to evaluate a material's worth. Is it parents who get to determine their household values? Or is it a few outspoken people in town who saw something one time that made them a little bit uncomfortable and now they want to make it everyone else's problem? It is essential for the future of Savoy Bookshop and Cafe that we find answers to these questions. If we were fined even the minimum penalty for each time an adult objected to some material for the sake of the children, our business would not survive. My own future depends on answers to these questions. It is my hope that the town council will realize through their own common sense that this is not in the interest of teachers, librarians, booksellers, or parents to put inappropriate materials in the hands of their children. This might be a little uncomfortable to hear. I also want to be very clear about our unfortunate reality. Young people are not finding sexually graphic, obscene, or pornographic materials in libraries and bookstores. They are finding it where the rest of us find it, whether we like it or not, for free on the internet. The idea of young people going to a physical establishment to seek physical copies of explicit material, which they might even have to pay money for, is so out of touch with how young people actually behave that it's actually kind of funny. If the common sense goal of this bill was to keep obscene materials out of kids' hands, they would restrict their phones, not their comic books. I sincerely hope you are not learning this for the very first time tonight from me. Oh, we have so much time. I will close with some examples of books that could be construed as obscene by an average person applying community standards using the definition of this bill. This is the body image book for girls by Charlotte Markey. Could possibly be banned for describing and depicting puberty, menstruation, and other bodily changes, and also for giving young people advice on how to handle tougher social and online dilemmas, such as being pressured to share nude photos or being pressured to sext. My next book is called Yes, No, A First Conversation About Consent by Megan Madison, Jessica Raleigh, and Isabel Roxas for identifying and showing each part of a child's body so they can better articulate to others how they do and do not want to be touched. And finally, a favorite for everybody, Everybody Poops by Taro Gomi for depicting excretory functions, which is explicitly prohibited in this bill. If you're asking yourself, why would anyone find these materials obscene or that they have no literary merit? Well, you would be very surprised. Everyone has very different opinions. I think we can do a lot better than these amendments and this bill. I appreciate the time to speak. Thank you.
Jim Tarbox, 52 Riverview Avenue. Many people have spoken on House Bill 6324 this evening. I narrowed it down to a few key things. The librarians spoke about the books. Book banning is sort of scary to me, and I'll explain to you why. But I want to kind of concentrate on the performance language that's in that bill. I'm a professional musician. Mr. Lothar can probably sympathize with some of my concerns here. So let me just paraphrase some of the things that are in the bill that concern me and should concern you greatly. Every person who willfully or knowingly promotes for commercial gain any show, performance, book, photograph, etc., which is obscene, shall be fined up to $1,000 or in prison for up to 2 years. This is Russia, baby. And performance means any exhibition performed before an audience. And in determining whether a book, performance, etc., is obscene, the trier of the facts must find that the average person applying contemporary community standards would find the work appeals to the prurient interest. Tell me who this average person is. Is it someone who voted for president who bragged about openly grabbing women by the crotch? Is it someone who ignores years of pedophile clergy? Or is it someone who unconditionally supports the Second Amendment, in the face of all the killing that's going on in this country? Is that the average person that we want to take a look at our performance and decide that we're somehow doing something obscene? I think not. And as a professional musician, that scares the hell out of me. And do I now have to worry about this average person being at one of my performances with a minor child in attendance, which happens frequently? Find my show offensive and call the morality police. And I'm curious if Mr. Lothar, who is a fine artist in his own right, shares these concerns. And I'd love to hear it during council's response, if you will. Also in the bill, nudity means less than completely and opaquely covered human genitals. It looks like no classical art or sculpture for your little snowflakes. Definitely no Michelangelo. That's a shame. And I'd like to read a few passages from a book that's still readily accessible to all members of the public. And I apologize if any of you are offended by this. Quote, "Our father is old and there is no man around here to give us children. Let's get our father to drink some wine and let's lie with him and preserve the seed of our father." That's from Genesis, ladies and gentlemen, the Holy Bible. It's in every motel room. It's in the library. It's anywhere you want to find it. Another one, "Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one." That's from the Song of Songs in the Old Testament. "And Judah said unto Onan, go on to thy brother's wife and raise up the seed for thy brother." Genesis chapter 38. And I'm by no means a bleeding heart liberal. And I absolutely agree that there's things that are inappropriate for minors particularly. But that's a discussion that has to happen between parents and their children, much as it did in my home and probably in your homes also. And that's not a burden that should be put on teachers and librarians. They have enough to do. They have enough to worry about keeping our kids educated. And I can't believe that the supporters of this pandering bill are so naive to think that their little Johnnies and Susies aren't streaming pornography on their phones and laptops, as been previously stated. And that's content that's far worse than anything you're going to find in any book in any library. And I take offense to any attack on the First Amendment, primarily because what I do, but I'm also an American. Its very language is the foundation of our system. And I want to share something very critical here. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany. Okay? And she watched as the first thing that happened is they banned the books. And then they got rid of the teachers. Then they began killing the intellectuals. All right? Started replacing the judiciary with sycophants. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? We look really close at what's going on these days. My mother came here. Thank God she came here because of the freedoms that are afforded her, starting with the First Amendment. My wife's grandfather was a high court justice in Lithuania during the same time period. The Russians came in, got rid of the books, got rid of the art, got rid of the intellectuals. He got word that they were coming after the judges next. He took his life savings and he paid a smuggler to get himself and his family out of Lithuania, ended up in a DP camp. So the same thing can happen here, folks, and it already is. There's attacks on the free press, rampant disinformation, ideologues on the Supreme Court. And for those of you who don't believe it, I suggest you read some American and world history. And for the true zealots who support garbage like this bill, I suggest you confess your own impure thoughts to your priest and stop projecting your own guilt and self-hatred on the society. I ask this council not to support this garbage bill.
My name is Colleen King. I'm teen librarian at Westerly Library in Wilcox Park. As a teen librarian and former school media specialist, I am concerned about the impact of Bill H6324 on our young patrons. I feel strongly about offering age-appropriate content in my library collection and take into consideration many elements when selecting a book to go on the shelves. Feedback from parents and their children is overwhelmingly in favor of many of the books that are being considered as obscene under this bill. In fact, I have parents check out LGBTQ+ novels and graphic novels to help them better understand their child's experiences. We offer workbooks a parent recently checked out to help him in speaking with his child about sexuality. If the legislature pressures librarians to remove these books from the shelves, we are not only removing them from the teens who read them, we are also keeping adults from reading them, adults who may gain significant understanding in how to be allies to LGBTQIA+ teens in their lives. Westerly is home to many LGBTQIA+ teens, and I'm grateful that the library can be a safe, inclusive space for them. I implore you to reconsider any support for this bill. My experience as a teen librarian has shown me that more people are in favor of the freedom of information over censorship. This freedom is one of the pillars of our nation, and I worry what would come as a result of limiting what books can go on library shelves. I also implore the town council and anyone in support of this bill to read some of the books being discussed. After I read the graphic novel Genderqueer, my understanding of the novel changed dramatically from what I originally assumed, considering the publicity it had received. Rather than the pornography many claim it to be, it is a memoir of a young person's life as they realize they are asexual and non-binary. Rather than being a book about teens wanting to participate in sex, it is about a teen realizing they do not want to have sex and understanding that this is okay too. I try to explain this when I am asked about the graphic novel. I encourage worried adults to read it, as I believe the only way for them to form their own opinion would be to read it themselves, rather than catch out of context snippets in newspaper articles. And in the end, if the worried adults still do not like the book, that is okay. They do not have to check it out from the library. I love being a librarian because I can tell my patrons that they will find books they like and books they will not like. I tell them there is nothing wrong with starting a book only to abandon it in the book drop on their way out. I teach my teen patrons how to reflect while reading. I often let them know if a book deals with heavy, possibly triggering topics, such as self-harm, eating disorders, or assault. I implore them to be kind to themselves and ask themselves questions while reading. Is this the right time for me to read this? Is it making me feel sad? Should I put this book away for a while? Librarians are in the profession of encouraging critical thought. When we remove books about difficult topics from the shelves, we deprive teen and adult patrons the opportunity to develop as critical thinkers. When we remove books about LGBTQIA+ characters from the shelves, we limit teens from finding characters to whom they relate, or we keep them from better understanding the experience of someone different from them. As a public librarian, I would not be doing my job if I censored bookshelves and deprived patrons of reading materials as a result of personal biases. I can assure you I take collection development very seriously, scouring reviews from book journals and reading many of the books myself. I want to know about every book that enters my collection, so I may better help my patrons in making a decision on a book that is right for them. I have found parents often ask for books as a way to help them start conversations with their children about relationships, dating, and sex, topics they may be unsure how to approach with their child. And if a parent does not want their child to read a book from our library, the parent has the right to discuss this choice with their child. However, I will never deprive other families the information and resources that they are looking for. As someone who hopes to have a family one day, I would not want the opinions of a small group of people to determine what my future children can or cannot read. This bill creates an environment of fear for librarians, booksellers, and teachers. It is an environment we are already living in. Librarians, booksellers, and teachers could be punished for adding these books to our shelves. This is a bill that attempts to intimidate us into erasing an entire population of people from our collections, stores, and classrooms. Westerly is a brilliant community full of amazing families. I was honored enough to spend this past Saturday with Westerly families at the library's Pride in the Park event. I met LGBTQIA+ families and allies from our community who were grateful for a safe space to celebrate Pride in their hometown. I will never forget the joy on the faces of my teen patrons when they arrived at Pride in the Park and saw all of their friends celebrating and rejoicing and being 100% themselves. It was a day I will forever cherish as one of my favorite experiences as a librarian. I urge the town council to reject support of Bill H6234. This bill would negatively affect the lives of the amazing families and townspeople I had the honor to meet and spend time with on Saturday. You may believe this is a bill about obscene materials or protecting children and not book banning. However, this bill would ultimately deprive parents their rights by removing books from a collection that could serve them. The definition of what is obscene differs from the individual. There are books in the library that I choose not to read, and that is my own choice that I am grateful for as a library user. Please consider my thoughts and do let me know if you would like any more information. I'm always available to chat more on this topic. Westerly is very important to me, and I'm so grateful to work such a wonderful place full of community members who care. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Kelly Cicchini. I live at 53 Granite Street in Westerly. I am a somewhat recently retired high school English teacher who quickly found out she's not very good at being retired. So I'm now a part-time faculty member at URI teaching Writing 104. So surprise, I'm here to express my concern about House Bill H6324. Yes, it comes from a place of concern for what minors are exposed to, which on its face seems perfectly reasonable and sensible. The danger lies in the nuances of the proposed law and in its application. As I'm sure you know, the First Amendment identifies a few narrow categories of speech that are not protected from government restrictions. One of those is obscenity. In 1973, Chief Justice Warren Burger outlined what he called guidelines for jurors in obscenity cases. And those are if, when taken as a whole, the average person applying contemporary community standards would find the work appeals to hurry and interest, or if the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law, and if the work lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, then a work may be considered obscene. But I ask you, as others have, who is the average person? What are the community standards? What is patently offensive? What qualifies something as lacking serious literary or artistic value? And who gets to decide? Any additions or revisions to the existing law would continue to include many books often banned for sexual content, including classics like The Catcher in the Rye, The Kite Runner, Beloved, The Bluest Eye, Ulysses, Madame Bovary, and one of my favorite books, Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, as well as young adult novels like Speak and Looking for Alaska. In Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, there's a scene in which the main character sees drawings of her soon-to-be father-in-law engaging in a sexual act with one of his Caribbean slaves. Would Mansfield Park then be considered obscene? Would the teachers who assign the novel in their classes have to worry about being fined $1,000 or being sent to jail for up to 2 years? According to this bill, it seems that they would. I read Mansfield Park in high school, as did thousands of other students that year, and I'm quite sure we were all more concerned with the horrors and injustices of slavery rather than with any kind of sexual awakening. I've taught many novels during my career, and from time to time, a parent would object to one. I always had an alternative unit ready. However, I found that many of the parents who raised objections did not even know what was actually in the novel. They had never read it. And yet, according to a recent New York Times article, the American Library Association found that 2,571 titles were challenged last year, an increase of nearly 40% over 2021. 40%. The most banned titles dealt with LGBTQ themes or race, but quite a few had to do with sexual content. And I believe this is where the problem with this bill lies. It begins with people who believe that their point of view should be the only point of view. It is a slippery slope that leads to the suppression of free speech and one that smacks of authoritarianism. My own son, who's now rolling up on 32, was a teenage video gamer. After watching him play, My objections were mainly about sexism and violence. Why, I asked my son, were all the women dressed like stereotypical prostitutes? Why was there so much gun violence? Why were all the characters driving like maniacs before crashing? These things concerned me greatly, especially the way in which the female characters were objectified and demeaned. I took those games away and explained that he would not be allowed to buy any new ones unless I was sure they were not sexist or violent. That was my decision as a parent. Not in a million years would I have tried to or wanted to make that decision for any other parent. Let me decide for myself and my own children what is offensive. Give me the right, or should I say, preserve my right to be more offended by sexism, racism, and violence than I am by human sexuality. Are we really still that puritanical? I grew up during the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, and I am deeply concerned about our democracy. Once again, I know the proposal to support H6324 comes from a place of caring and concern for children. I get that. But unless we reject supporting this bill, especially as it's written now, we are stepping over a line. We are on that slippery slope. We are in danger of allowing the government to decide what we, all of us, can read and learn about. We are giving away a piece of our autonomy, a piece of our freedom. We're taking a step away from democracy and toward authoritarianism. I respectfully ask you to reconsider supporting House Bill H6324. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Castiglione. I live on 10 Batterson Avenue in beautiful Westerly. I'm here to talk about H6224, as many people have been. I am not a librarian. I am not a bookseller. I am not an educator. I do work in the performing arts. I am a house manager at the GAM Theater in Warwick. And as someone who works in the arts, I am most certainly concerned about the implications for all of us, because this doesn't just affect librarians. This doesn't just affect educators, although that's obviously very important. This could potentially affect anyone in the performing arts in the state of Rhode Island. But that's not actually why I'm here. I'm here, my first ever town council meeting, because I'm a mom. My son Juno was born almost a year ago, and I'm here for him. Now, my son is only a year old and he can't read, although he's very interested in books, which I feel very grateful for. But as a parent, I want the decision. I want to make the decision for what my child can and cannot access. Now, I'm not going to be over his shoulder every day for the rest of his life. Really just about the next 2 years, if I'm lucky. Before he goes to preschool, I mean, I'm not like sending him off anywhere. But I adore my son. He has brought so much joy to my life. And I'm here because it's so important to me that he does not grow up in a place where, you know, let's go back to the topic of community standards, right? Like I want to choose what he can take out from the library. I trust librarians, I trust educators who have the advanced degrees that I do not, to choose what they think is appropriate for stocking in a library. And as they've mentioned, they are already beholden to legislation vis-a-vis obscenity, et cetera. I feel like I can look at these people who care deeply. And again, you know, people don't go into any of these industries for the money. It is for the love of it. There's no one I could trust more if I sent my child to the library and he was interested in a book about a topic that maybe I wouldn't be comfortable with, but a librarian's like, hey, this is age appropriate for your child. Why don't you give it a shot? And I can look at it and be like, yes, great decision for my own kid. I want my child to have as much access as possible. I want to be able to make the decisions about what he's able to see. I'm not going to be able to control everything he sees on the internet. The internet is the Wild West. Libraries, bookstores, these are the safest possible places he could be acquiring knowledge. I'd also like to address the fact that, you know, this bill didn't come from nowhere, because there are bills very similar to this popping up across the country. We know this, and we know why. We know why. It's because this conversation would not be about just regular heterosexual sex if that was really what it's about, because nobody would care. The examples we've heard about things that are inappropriate from people who think they're inappropriate specifically are going after queer people. That is not something that I want my child to grow up experiencing. What? Sorry, what was, all right, you got it, sir. My apologies, this is my first town council meeting. I know I already mentioned that, but I wanted to say that because I have never felt so passionate to show up to a town council meeting for any reason. I missed my son's bedtime by over an hour at this point. It's so important to me that we know this isn't just about the libraries. We know this isn't just about the books, because we know where this legislation is coming from, because we're seeing it across the country, because the people who are pushing it are also saying things like, we should exterminate trans people. That's not a society I want my beautiful son to grow up in. I do not want him to grow up experiencing potential racism. My son is mixed. Racism, transphobia, sexism, homophobia. I don't want him to know this. And I knew this acutely growing up. As a queer teenager, libraries saved my life. I would not have been able to safely access information that I needed at that age. Information that was not inappropriate by age. And I say this again as a mother and also as a former educator, former health educator, and former sexuality educator. But that's not what this is about. We know what this is about. This is about going after people based on identity. I know people disagree with me, but it really is. And because this doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like I said, this is happening across the country. And we can be a part of history right now. We can support this ridiculous bill, and we will be remembered as a joke. Or we can say, no, we are going to leave this to the professionals. We are going to let librarians do their jobs. We're going to let teachers do their jobs. We are going to let people focus on what is important, and it is not this. This piece of legislation is a joke, and it is an affront. This is a slippery slope, as you've already heard. You've heard many people this evening speak much more eloquently than I have. But this bill is a mistake. Even if it is put forward with good intentions, it is the very tip of a slippery slope. Anyone who has studied history knows this intimately. That is not the world I want my son to grow up in. And as a lifelong Rhode Islander, that's not what I expect from a state with the history we have of freedom and free thinking. Let's not equate any mention of a sexual act that this person or that person might find offensive. Let's leave this to the professionals, leave this to the parents. As a parent, I empathize with how hard these decisions are as a parent. I truly do. I realize my son is only one, but he's not going to be one forever. I think about this constantly. I'm only going to be able to protect him so much. But he's safe in the hands of librarians. And I strongly believe he's safe in the hands of other artists. And I will leave it at that. I will just say one more thing. Please leave it up to these talented, smart, thoughtful, librarians, booksellers, artists. If we take this away from them, we are taking away multitude of resources for children going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen Almeida, 128 Woodville Road, Hope Valley. I am the librarian at Westerly Middle School, and I am going to cut my intended remarks short. You're welcome. I am disappointed to see Westerly again finds itself at the forefront of another misguided attempt to circumvent the First Amendment. In the last few years, Westerly school libraries have been subject to multiple efforts to censor and limit our collections based on political and ideological beliefs held by a vocal minority. Earlier today, I was told that this bill's language does not constitute censorship. However, it's my belief, but also the position of the American Library Association, that intimidation and threats of legal action are in fact a preemptive form of censorship. Last year, there was an unsuccessful attempt to have a graphic novel removed from one of our libraries. That effort failed. And I don't believe that it is a coincidence that we have a proposal to change language in an existing bill to specifically criminalize objectionable graphic novels in our school libraries. And I think this proposal reeks of sour grapes. Thank you.
Good evening, councilors. I'm Bill Miller, 35 Pasadena Avenue. I have been in the publishing business my whole life, starting as a reporter at the New London Day. I worked at Time Incorporated for over 30 years, and I'm very excited to say I have recently published a novel. I'm also on the board of the Westerly Library. What I want to do tonight is not go after the statutes, the new bill 6324, as much as talk about your resolution and appeal to your self-interest. I don't know why you'd want to get involved in this thorny issue. As you've heard tonight, other than one person, there is a unanimity of thought about what people think about this resolution. I mean, the new statute. In your resolution of support, it says much needed and common sense. I haven't heard anybody articulate why it's much needed. We've had one gentleman who I understand his passion, and he's mentioned 3 books. It sounds to me like, much needed sounds like there's a big problem. I don't see where the problem is. We have, as many people have said, we have professionals at our libraries. We have professionals at our bookstores. We have professionals at the United Theater. So I just don't see where there's a problem in Westerly. You can dispute this. You can go to the library and say, hey, I'm not crazy about this book. And your thoughts will be considered. And then the other part of it is much needed and common sense. I don't see where there's any common sense here. You have something that is inherently subjective, which is art, either written, video, pictures, and it's impossible to define it. It's impossible for anyone to say this is obscene and this is not obscene. As much as you might try to narrow it down to specific examples. In the bill, it talks about a trier of fact. That's taken from the Supreme Court case of Miller versus California. And it says the trier of fact would probably be a jury. Now, what's that going to open things up for? Are you all as a council going to be the trier of fact? Or are you all going to bring the obscenity charge? Is it going to be done by individuals? And if it's done by individuals, are those going to start to be nuisance lawsuits for every library, both public and school, in the community? So, you know, I don't know why you would want to put your foot into this water. If people don't like what's going on the books at the state level, let them talk to Mr. Azzanaro. Let them decide what they think is right and wrong and express it to your public officials and vote if you don't like what they do. But I don't think standing here tonight that this is something that the town council really needs to bother itself with. Thank you.
Jonathan Daly LaBelle, relatively new resident of Westerly. So just speaking to the resolution, which so many people are speaking so passionately about, I just want to say I'm very heartened because I really didn't know what this meeting was going to be. And, you know, I guess we all carry some judgment in ourselves because when I parked, this is meant to be humorous in a way. But when I parked to come in today, I saw a lot of pickup trucks out there. And I was really worried about what the dialogue was going to be. But I'm very happy. So many librarians, so many teachers, they really should be one of our main guides in society, like not just here tonight, but just in general. That's where the knowledge is, and that's what we should look toward. So I can't really say much more than what's already been said. I will touch on the politics just slightly though. So just for knowledge, when I look at the sponsors of the resolution, you know, this the proposed law at the State House, it's Republicans and it's Democrats, but it's really the Democrats, which we have here in Westerly as well, is it, you know, where they say they're Democrat, but if you actually look at what their agenda is, you really would have a tough time saying like what part of their platform is a Democrat. So that really kind of tells us, you know, what's going on here. We see across the country what's going on. This isn't just like some small isolated incident. That's something much larger is happening. And some of the speakers did touch on that and did speak to that. And I think we need to be realistic and you know, include that as part of the conversation. This isn't just some real narrow view, real narrow look, trying to tailor something to make it better. You just, you know, you watch the news, you read the news, you know, we can see what's happening across the country. So really no specific disrespect to the sponsor up at the State House, who is my rep. But I just don't see where his values have him as a Democrat. And so that doesn't make him, well, in my opinion, it makes him wrong. But I mean, he has a right to what he believes and what he advocates for, but people should be very clear that it's really not, if people have the democratic values, small d, big D, you know, that's not what he's about. But it's Rhode Island. And so if, you know, a lot of people make the calculation, if they're conservative, if they're actually Republican, then they put the D behind their name very often in order to get elected. Yeah, and I don't think the white guys, I'm going to say, you know, the white guys, actually, I think they did pretty well tonight from what I've seen. So that's good. I think the numbers were actually represented pretty well. I don't think we need a month. I think, you know, I think if we, I mean, you know, I mean, just look at the history. And it's not just history. It's not like we have to go into history and just say, oh, you know, when have white males dominated society and what does that look like? It's still happening. And that's where a lot of this pushback, that's where a lot of this kind of ugliness comes from, is a lot of white males are not comfortable with, you know, having to kind of share power, share responsibility, to listen to other points of view, to respect other points of view, to respect, you know, just that people are different. There's a lot of fear, which turns into some really bad things sometimes. But there is kind of fear of the other. And that's really kind of the history of the white male. And it continues today. We see it. And so there is a struggle going on. And I hope that Westerly, you know, I'm a resident of Westerly now. I hope that Westerly Town Council, which I believe is majority of Democrats, will certainly put down the right markers. And I would even say, you know, on a certain level, this resolution didn't even necessarily need to be considered. But I like democracy. I like the discussion. So I'm very happy to see this idea. It looks like this idea is being repudiated. I hope that the town council will repudiate this. But actually for the future, I would love to see the town council bring forward a resolution for public consideration to denounce this legislation. So if this legislation comes forward, instead of having the good citizens of Westerly have to come out to make sure that the leaders are representing us properly and representing our values properly, to really have something come out that then people, the librarians and the teachers can just say, yes, town council, Westerly Town Council. That's correct. You're doing it the right way.
Please do.
Good. My name is Catherine Rosen. I live at 5 Gull Terrace, and I am here to speak about the much discussed resolution you have to support, I think it's 6324 or something like that. Anyway, it's all been said. I just have one more point to make, and that's when I read the bill itself, and I read it very carefully and did some research, I honestly thought that it was not a real effort at lawmaking because it was so vague. I mean, the average person, contemporary standards. I've got good news. I'm the average person. I'll take care of all of this. No problem. Anyway, I think it's just a statement, personally. I don't think it's really an effort to get something done. And I would just say I'm disappointed in the council for feeling that we as Westerly needed to weigh in on it. I mean, I don't know how it has anything to do with council business or town business. And here we've all spent many hours here, and so have you, listening to a whole bunch of people say this is a dumb resolution, mostly, and it could have all been avoided. So that's all I have to say.
Mrs. Rosamundo, name and address for the record, please. Mrs. Rosamundo.
Nina Rosamundo, 12 West Fairway Avenue, Westerly. Catherine just stole my thunder. But several other people have said the same thing. I'm going to eliminate 90% of what I was going to say and just simply say this. I also am saddened and distressed about this legislation that has been proposed. But I am really upset that the town council has taken this up for the following reason. It is my understanding that your job is to deal with town issues, not deal with state legislation. And unfortunately, a lot of people who spoke this evening have left, but I would encourage those of you who are left, please write to the members of the Judiciary Committee. If they do have a hearing take the time, even if you have to take time off, but it'll usually be after 6 o'clock, and go and testify. Let the legislators know how you feel about this. But again, I am deeply puzzled that you would take up such a resolution that has to do with something that is really the purview of the state legislature. I guess I fundamentally believe that politicians, particularly local ones, should not be deciding what is okay for a librarian to check out, whether they work in a public library or a school, and what it is we can and cannot read. The idea of punishing librarians, as many, many people have said, with fines and perhaps prison, is outrageous. And that is the part that I personally consider obscene. So I would request that the town council going forward not consider state legislation, other than if you want to hear from all of us. And again, we can all let our town councilors know how we feel about things. We don't need to spend your valuable time when you should be working on things like, how are you going to pay to upgrade the sewer system, the sewer treatment plant as one? How would you, one of my favorites, this came up at I don't know what to call it, the meeting on mental health. How about proposing that there be a social services person, whether an employee or on a grant or something for this town? And I could probably list 10 other things that you as a council have not gotten to. So I urge you to get back to town business and leave state legislature to deal with proposed legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. There you go. Thank you.
So my name is Marco Castiglione, and I live on 12 Rockridge Road, Westerly, Rhode Island. I'm here to speak against Bill H6324. I am a senior in high school. I'm about to graduate, so I am about to leave this town. And it's recently come to my attention that this bill has been brought to legislation. This is not how I want to remember this town. I don't want to remember lead this town while it is playing at its hand in this right-wing culture war against LGBTQ people. All right. There have been 550 anti-LGBTQ and trans legislation that's going throughout this country. That mass censorship of topics around race and LGBTQ people, especially perpetrated by Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, who's wiping out books from shelves, cleaning them because what? Like this big spooky agenda that of gay people existing? I don't understand, right? And regarding the bill itself, if I want to read a book and a librarian wants to have the book in their library, why is that your business? Right? Why is it your business what I want to read, what librarians want to put in their libraries? Just seeing you play in this mass attempt at censoring these topics just it kind of just baffles me a little bit. If you say yes to this bill and this bill passes, you are playing in the hands of the GOP's current attempt to eradicate LGBTQ education from this country. Thank you.
Name and address for the record,
Jason
please.
Jarvis, 70 Beach Street, Westerly. I support everything that's been said in opposition to the resolution, and I also support CRMC going and taking over anything that has to do with right-of-ways. But I want to put some perspective in a few things you might not know about me. I spent 8 years as a therapist running a drug rehab. Very proud of that kid over there because I worked with his dad for those years. After working there a few years, we realized how many kids in that program were victims of sexual abuse, and we had to develop an entire separate program to deal with victims of sexual abuse. The brutality that we had to deal with and to witness and hear about was horrifying. On that note, that has to do with mental illness and sickness and has nothing to do with, censoring of books. I mean, some of these kids, one of the kids we dealt with had the most horrific life, had been sexually abused from the age of 2 to the age of 14 and didn't realize there was anything wrong with it. And then at the age of 14 became an offender and then went to jail. The point being, I've had a very interesting life. My father was born in 1904, too young for World War I, too old for World War II. And he saw the atrocities that came about from fascism. That to me is absolutely frightening. And just to kind of go sideways on that one, I've read the Bhagavad Gita, I've read The Art of War, I've read the Old Testament, the New Testament. Just about every religious text out there I bothered to read because my father said, you know what, get a broader view. And then I worked for a captain who used to say, don't bring God into this, we're all going to get killed. So I just think that it's very frightening to me that we have some people that speak on things, not realizing that the King James Version was edited on the behest of the British government or the British hierarchy. So the Old Testament was edited by someone else. And we're going down this path to try to find the truth. And the only way to find the truth is you talk to somebody that works at a library, or you find the text and you go look in a book. I have my family Bible at home. It's originally from my dad's family, so it's from Scotland. I had somebody redo it for me. It was written in the early 1800s. I'm just gravely concerned, and my father's rolling around in the sea right now, that slippery slope, I heard it mentioned earlier, and it's frightening to me that we can't go down this road, no matter what reason, no matter what political view you have. We can't forget our history. And I hate to say this, but how many people of color are in this room? There's two. I came to this town in 1976. It was the most bigoted place I'd ever experienced in my life. And the brutality that existed, and the brutality that happened to my family at the hands of police officers, at the hands of teachers. And you know how I escaped that? Books and music. You know, it kept me out of jail, kept me out of drugs, kept me, you know, where I am, got me where I am today. And to think that now we're going to make a choice at what somebody can read and make the choice of what's obscene. Some people think my skin color is obscene. Some people think my dreadlocks were obscene. But where I came from in the Bahamas, Christopher Columbus is obscene. He's obscene. He raped, pillaged, and killed my ancestors. That to me is obscene. But who decides that? Who makes that decision on what's profane, what's pornography, and what's obscene? Who the hell gets the right to make that decision for me? Nobody. First Amendment gives me the right to choose that. Thank you.